Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wisdom Seeker Live podcast. Good to be back after an off week and look forward to a great time of seeking wisdom together and looking at our topic for the day, which is about feeling entitled. And what I would encourage is those that join us to be sure and share where you're joining from. And as always, want to be sure that you ask questions, make comments, engage. That makes for a much more interesting podcast. And as always, I'd like to start off talking about how we see wisdom here on Wisdom Seeker Live podcast. And wisdom's a journey, and that journey is basically a three-step process. And the first step in that process is to gain knowledge, and to that's just facts, figures, and information that we can gain along the way, learn from formal or informal opportunities. Hopefully, we are seeking to gain new knowledge each day. And just for the record, there has been at times an idea or concept that knowledge is power, and I have to disagree that knowledge would say that knowledge isn't power, and we can maybe talk about that at another point. But second step in the process is for us to go to understanding, and understanding is based in experience, and it's based in application of the knowledge we've gained. We start using the knowledge we've gained in order to be able to solve problems, answer questions, make plans, and so on. And so it's a process of using the knowledge that we have found and using it hopefully in a constructive and positive fashion. The third and the biggest step in this journey is to take the leap into wisdom. And when we take a leap into wisdom, the big thing is our perspective changes. We go from using our knowledge and our understanding to deal with our own issues and understand them only from our personal perspective, and beginning to see, and that prior to wisdom, that's the way we see it. But with wisdom, we are getting a bigger picture perspective. We began to look at things in a much bigger view. That includes not only, we need to look at ourselves inwardly and outwardly, but we began to look at others and how our choices affect others around us, including family, friends, colleagues, and also how our choices impact the world we live in. And so as we begin to do that, we get at that much greater perspective. And the tendency is to see things in a greater sense, including begin to see consequences for our choices and begin to see patterns. And for those of us that are of a spiritual bent, the big thing is we begin to see things through God's eyes, which is a different perspective than our self-centered view of things. And it helps us to make better choices and consider long-term consequences for those choices. So that's about the wisdom journey as we see it. And hope that you will join us to become a wisdom seeker so that you can get that much bigger perspective. And today, our topic is it wise to feel entitled? And this is a pervasive situation that we deal with in our world, because we are anymore even taught that we are entitled to certain things. And the problem is that we have created a situation that is bringing a challenge into our world. And what I like to do sometimes is to bring in just look at sheer definition of the terms we're using to kick it off so that we kind of set the framework for the conversation. So, went out as usual, looked up the word entitlement just to see what the dictionary says. And this is what I found in it. And the first definition is the fact of having a right to something. Second definition is the amount to which a person has a right. And then the last, and this is, it's important we see all of these, and that is the belief one is inherently deserving or deserving of privileges or special treatment. And so just something to think about. Do we have, are we entitled? And when you looked at the first definition, the fact of having a right to something, there are certain rights that we are afforded, especially in the U.S., but in many countries, we have legal rights that we're afforded as part of being a citizen of that country. And when you think in those terms, being entitled or having a sense of feeling of entitlement is expected and normal, as those are rights that are given us under law and under statement of agreement with our fellow citizens. The challenge is that we have taken those concepts a lot further in our world. And as a result, we have moved into a very pervasive belief, the third definition of the word entitlement, that we are inherently deserving of privileges or special treatment. And the challenge with that is quite large and something that we have to really be mindful of and the impact that it has on our culture. So I want to shout out, welcome Jeremy and Lee and Rolf. Glad to have all of you. Look forward to hearing your comments and questions as we go along. So again, the idea of having rights, legal, moral rights as given to us by our rules and laws and that are agreed upon as a culture and society are appropriate and helpful, because that helps us understand what our boundaries are and parameters, and also quite often designed to protect us from other people or even inappropriate government action. But the challenge is this pervasive nature that we are inherently deserving of privileges and special treatment. And it is something that has become pervasive, and it has affected behaviors on a large scale culturally. And so we really need to question or ask about the wisdom in that form of entitlement. And so really want to dig into this a little bit and consider the implications of this pervasive belief that has become a part of our culture. So Lee has a question here. Entitlement. Nobody's entitled to anything. Any entitlement makes someone else a slave to provide your entitlement. Only entitlements you have are free as written in the Bill of Rights, all free. Any costs such as fees are an abuse by government. Am I wrong? I think you certainly hit on a way to look at it, Lee, that entitlement in terms of this inherent privilege or this belief that we are owed or have a right to more than just freedom and protection from the law is where we get in trouble. And yes, I like the fact that you say when we talk in terms of entitlement, that mean in that fashion, that quite often it puts others in a situation that they're forced to provide that entitlement, and it negatively impacts those other people. And the other part of entitlement that troubles me is the fact that when we approach life with a feeling or a sense of entitlement, that quite often it becomes purely self-centered. And the value of wisdom is seeing how our choices impact others, and to not just see it, but take it into account as we begin to make decisions. And a sense of entitlement basically says, well, I don't care if I see the impact that my choice is going to have on someone else, but I'm going to proceed anyway because that is my right. That is what I'm entitled to. And I think that is creating a lot of situations where we are dealing with conflict because people are not thoughtful of each other and those around them, as well as it even gets into situations where this mindset moves over into a willingness to do things, take actions that are even illegal as a result of a belief that we're inherently deserving of privileges or special treatment. It's just a challenge that we're facing. And we see it evidenced in so many ways. Lee, take care. Thanks for stopping by. Maybe you can join us a little later as part, whatever. Have a great day. So, how do we see the results, or what are the results of these behaviors that we see as a result of this feeling of inherently deserving of privileges or special treatment? And we see it in the form of behaviors together out in society. Excuse me a moment. My apologies. Itchy nose. And for example, movement, people walking around in public places. Unfortunately, a sense of entitlement shows up as people deciding to do things without considering what impact it has on the people around us. And that includes, for example, walking in stores. People walking around in stores quite often have a sense of entitlement will move and behave without consideration of others. Walk in front, stop and block areas that people are trying to walk, and so on. And so again, the key problem is that our behaviors become very self-centric, and that we do not consider that we're impacting other people and the consequences of those choices. We see it quite often out in driving. Well, we see people driving in such a way and making choices in such a way that they are not thoughtful of the people around them. And as a result, worst case scenario, it creates a sense of a fright or a sense of irritation on the part of the people that are not being thought of, not being considered. And in worst case situations, it sets up a greater chance for accidents to occur because of decisions made in the absence of considering how it impacts others, because it's my right to do what I want to, when I want to, the way I want to. And that is part of the pervasive mindset that is in our culture today, that anything I do is based on what I want to do, regardless of how it impacts others. And as a result of this, it does impact others, and it impacts others in a negative fashion. It creates a sense of hostility at times. I think, frankly, we have a problem and that has become more pervasive. I'm not going to say it's a constant, but has become more pervasive, called road rage. And a lot of the reason for road rage is because people behaving out of a sense of entitlement when they're driving. And that's an unfortunate way to behave, because it creates problems relationally with other drivers, and it creates tensions between people. And in the same fashion, again, other daily parts of our lives, how we behave when we are in public places. Even, for example, another way we see this, that I'm trying to think in terms of just practical considerations, but one of those is in how we park. And when we choose how to park, and we do so that in a sense of entitlement, and we park where we want, however we want, regardless of the implications to others, it creates a real problem. And that is that it causes a ripple effect, so that people's behaviors, if we will, domino, and it creates issues. For example, or to follow this example about parking, when someone parks poorly in a parking space, then the next person that comes up and parks poorly related to that vehicle, because you need to be able to get out of your car. And so what happens is a ripple effect, and you'll see multiple cars parked where they're not parked well, and it creates problems for the person in the next parking space. And this is, again, a part of what or at least I believe, is part of this entitlement mindset. And it's an unwise thing, because the result is that we are not looking and seeing that big picture and considering what the impacts that we have on others. And then, if you want to take that a little further down the road, we get in situations where people get trapped in their car, or make it difficult to get out, and you end up with dinged doors, and people's patience tested, and even you get into situations where trying to pull out, and you have poorly parked cars, and you end up with accidents that could have been prevented by simply acting wisely in our choices and considering the impact on those around us. And again, we see more and more of this type of thing going on. Welcome, Rick. Glad to have you with us. So this sense of entitlement has consequences, and we as a culture are paying a price for it. And it's not just peculiar, I don't believe, to the U.S. I believe that this is a cultural problem we see throughout the world. When people behave entitled, it causes other consequences and issues to arise. And it just creates issues, and it, by its very nature, to behave in an entitled way, it goes against wisdom as we see it. Because wisdom causes us to behave in such a way that we don't act out of entitlement. We don't ignore the consequences or the impact and effect on others. So by its very nature, to again using that third definition, and that is the belief that one is inherently deserving of privileges or special treatment. When we behave in that fashion, inherently, it is an unwise way to behave because it takes out the need to consider, excuse me, that bigger picture. How am I impacting others? And how are those impacts good or bad? And does it affect others in a way that I would not want to be affected? So the very act or very behaviors related to the idea of entitlement. In other words, we are entitled to special privilege, special treatment, is inherently an unwise choice. And we are seeing the results of that happening. We are seeing relationship problems because people feel entitled to do whatever they want without consequence or consideration, including of each other. And it's a big challenge. And I hope that what we'll begin to do as we grow in wisdom is that we will begin to understand that entitlement, which is in its strictest sense provided under most rule of law, that we have certain rights and all that we're granted as part of an agreement, moral, cultural agreement with each other. But beyond that, we have to choose to be wise about our behaviors and our choices because of the impact that it has on other people. And when we, out of a sense of entitlement, choose not to have that consideration, the results can be very impactful and not in a good way. We're talking about people getting in conflict, whether it's verbal or even physical altercation. And then we get into our behaviors and that attitude and the impacts in when we are in our vehicles or in even in public transportation. It is, in public transportation, the entitlement mindset says I'll sit wherever I want, however I want, regardless of the impact it has on others. And we've, seen very poignant videos out of people that appear to be physically healthy, maintaining a seat when someone elderly or injured or disabled is looking for a seat and having to stand up public transportation. I think that, again, is evidence of this entitlement mindset or belief. And it is, again, affecting a lot of people in a lot of ways. Another video I know that has made its way around is a video of a loaded elevator. And you have, in this particular scenario, you have a young, healthy male that jumps on the elevator just before it closes. And the problem is that this person overloads the elevator. So the elevator won't go anywhere because there's too many people. And yet this mindset, apparent mindset that this person is entitled to ride the elevator and get on when they want, timing wise, because they're entitled, and the impact that it has. And the video is very poignant, again, pointing out that we shouldn't be considering that we are entitled to do whatever we want or whenever we want, or that we are deserving of some kind of privilege or special treatment. That is not a wise approach to dealing with life. So Jeremy has a comment here. Jeremy, sorry, I was a little slow to get to that. We're entitled to live, breathe, eat, sleep, have equal education, and to live. All other forms are subjective and fluctuates, yet it is misused to achieve our wants. Okay. And Jeremy, I appreciate the comment. I'm a little more basic in what I believe our entitlement is. And our entitlement is to have life. In other words, be able to live, breathe, eat, sleep, and that's part of life. And I typically would throw in also some manner of clothing, because that's important to our culture and the well-being of others, and shelter. But that's where I draw the line. I don't believe that we are entitled to anything beyond that as a human being, and anything beyond that is extra. But again, we have a limited amount that we should be entitled to, and the rest is something that we all work through together as humans and culturally to figure out the right things to do, and hopefully as part of a shift and a growth culturally, as we begin to ask, not only is it legally right, morally right, but is it wise? And we ask those questions of ourselves. And on some level, we have to ask it of others, because we impact our culture by our choices and behavior. Welcome, Razim. Glad to have you. I appreciate your support. Let's see. And then Jeremy makes comment, it is our responsibility to educate others between the two definitions of entitlement and what we are truly entitled to versus the other belief of what we're entitled. Indeed, I think part of what we have to do culturally and as individuals is to, again, behave wisely and to be willing to behave in such a way with the understanding that it impacts others. And this is a tough one, and we need lots of wisdom about this. But the old saying is that all that is needed for evil to abound is for good men to do nothing. And the good men part is people. And I think we have also become unwise in regards to this, that we no longer are willing to, and this has to be done wisely as well, but to say that I'm not going to stand by and allow others to behave in such a way that it negatively impacts or harms other people, including me. And when we learn how to wisely approach those issues and behave in such a way that is congruent with not being entitled and not being self-centered and everything, then we will begin to impact the behaviors of others and the culture around us. And one of the best things, and this is something that many of us don't consider, but one of the best things we can do in this regard is to be a great example. If all of us choose to be a great example of doing the right and wise things, then others will be impacted. And if we grow enough culturally to make that pervasive throughout our culture, then it sets a pattern, or it causes influence on others in such a way that to not behave wisely and without feeling entitled, those behaviors become peculiar and people are uncomfortable, because the norm is that we behave in such a way that it is wise that we are considering those around us and the consequence or impact on our choices to those around us. So, this sense of entitlement, again, be very careful. We have certain entitlements that are provided by us legally and morally in cultures and societies because it's necessary to have those protections and guarantees to be able to live and to live well. But unfortunately, under the guise of freedom, and we are seeing such a large group of people and mindset that we can are entitled again to privileges and special treatment. In other words, we because we feel like we need special treatment, we don't have to consider how we do things and how it impacts others. And the ways it shows up is quite remarkable. Another one that is a real pet peeve of mine is that we're entitled in a retail establishment. We're buying something. And the entitlement mindset says, well, I picked this up and I think I want to buy it. And then I walk away and decide, no, I don't want to buy it after all. I changed my mind. So I take that something and put it down on the shelf or table closest to where I stand rather than take that back to where I found it. And that, in my mind, is an evidence of an entitled mindset that we can make choices and not suffer the consequences of those choices, such as taking the time to go back and put it back where we found it. And if you look in retail world today, that has become a very expensive choice that we have made culturally, a very negative impact of an entitlement or special privileges mindset that has become pervasive. And what happens is, again, the impact on others is remarkable. I assume I'm not the only one that complains about not being able to find things in stores, or worse, thinking we've found one thing, pick it up, and walk to pay for it, realizing that what we picked up is not what was labeled on a shelf or whatever. And hopefully we figure it out before we complete a purchase. But I've had situations that go make my purchase, go home and realize that it is not what I anticipated. It's not the same size that was I expected it to be, because people had moved things around. They had picked something up, looked at it, moved, and then put it back, but in the wrong place. Again, because they're entitled to have the privilege to do what they want, pick up things, look at them, not put them back, and so on, because of this special privilege that goes with this entitlement mindset. So it is, the impacts are quite remarkable, and these days quite pervasive. Welcome, Karen. Glad to have you with us as always. Good evening, Dr. Shama. It's always good to have you join us as well, my dear friend. And so this entitled mindset is impacting us a great deal, and it is counter to wise behavior, because part of wisdom and wise behavior is seeing that bigger picture. And before we put something back there where we didn't find it, we would consider, is this going to create an issue for others, whatever that looks like? Or is our choice of how we walk or drive and behave otherwise, how is it impacting other people? What is my choice doing to those people and their freedom to move and be as well. So this entitlement mindset is, and the way it has become, and I remind you of the what we looked up from a definition standpoint. The third definition is the belief that one is inherently deserving of privileges or special treatment. And when we behave in that fashion, becomes inherently unwise, because at that point we are choosing not to behave in consideration of the impact on other people. And so as wise people, we need to really consider that, and first be an example of how we should live with limited entitlement, like Jeremy had talked about, that our entitlement is very basic and limited. Beyond that, if we are demanding these rights and privileges, we are becoming that third definition, that we are deserving of privilege and special treatment. And I think that is an unwise approach. And I believe that we're seeing the negative impacts of that becoming the pervasive thought in our cultures. In fact, one of the ways that I have seen it in other countries, for example, is a few years ago visiting in Rome, Italy. I observed behaviors that were indicative of this mindset and unwise in the way that people drove in Rome. That in fact, that people ignored any rules or guides in driving to a point that they would not be wise in regards to other people and endanger themselves. The particular situation that just is very vivid in my mind is people motoring on scooters in heavy traffic in Rome. And I watched people on these scooters actually go down the wrong side of the road with buses coming at them from the other side. And that is based in an entitlement mentality, that they have the special privilege to drive however, wherever, whenever they want, regardless of consequence. Doesn't matter that their behavior could create an accident. Worse, that their behaviors will cause their death because of their thought of privilege. And so, again, it's pervasive. It's not just a U.S. thing. It's around the world. In my recent visit to India, observed some of the same behaviors. Lots of people making choices in interactions in public that have no consideration for the impact on those around them. And it would included driving. It was quite interesting. I am very fortunate while I was there not to have driven in those circumstances. I don't know that I would have survived without problems as a result, but I think it's a picture of this entitlement thinking that has become pervasive. I can drive how and where I want in the way that I choose to, regardless of impact on others. And that's part of this entitlement mindset. I think we see it in behaviors in public when people don't like something, and rather than handle it in a wise fashion, they just do whatever they decide they want, which can include as seemingly minor as just calling people names and behaving in that fashion, but it goes into extremes of, well, I don't like this, so I'm going to destroy people and property. And it is an unwise choice on a lot of levels. but yet it has become part of our cultures, unfortunately, that if I don't like something, I'm entitled to behave however I want, doesn't matter. And it is, by the way, it is not, this entitlement behavior mindset is not linked to any one political group, socioeconomic group. It is pervasive throughout all of culture, and it's creating more and more difficulties and more negative impacts on our society. And it's unwise, because a wise approach always considers the impact on those around them. That's that bigger picture. That is that bigger consideration. And when we stop and think about the consequences of our choices and behaviors, which is the wise approach, that big picture, we have less behaviors that negatively impact. And it just, again, try to be considerate of the fact that not only is that negative impact based in relations, um, relationships, but it's impacting us from a cost standpoint. Those behaviors quite often are leading or lending itself to additional cost for us in our culture, financial and in other ways. And it's the unwise behavior has bad consequences that are affecting us. And the unwise behavior in this case is the mindset of deserving special privileges and special treatment, or deserving of privileges and special treatment. And the consequences of that and the behaviors that go with it are impacting us a great deal. I know at one point there were and I think they're still out there, studies on people's behaviors and this entitlement thought process and the cost to us in business, even. And the numbers that I have seen are staggering. We're talking, one of the data points I saw was $50 billion that this is costing us. And the way it's happening is that people are stealing time and materials from employers, because it is their privilege or special treatment to be able to take whatever they want. And as a result, it's costing us a great deal of money culturally as a society. It's affecting prices, it's affecting how we behave as a result, and so on. And so the implications of this mindset, which causes certain behaviors, the implications are quite large. And again, if we break it down, we see it's not wise behaviors either. Let's see. Jeremy has a comment. The unwise mindset is even in today's youth, and when they don't get what they believe is what they are entitled to, they tend to use laws and threats against others so that they coerce others to give into their unwise mindset of entitlement. Yes, we see it in parent and child relationships, that somehow that a young person is entitled to certain special treatment or privileges, and if they don't get it, then they will actually leverage at least their perception of certain legal standings and legal implications to have their way. And again, it's very unfortunate, and it is very pervasive. It is a big part of our culture, and it has created a lot of conflict It's created a lot of moral and ethical considerations, and it is impacting, for example, when we have our legal system and our law enforcement system tied up with some of these things, then the impact is that they are less available to be able to deal with real activities that they should be dealing with, because they're dealing with things that are maybe not illegal, but they're unwise, and they are based in this entitlement mindset. So this has become pervasive in our culture. We are suffering the consequences of this pervasiveness. And my hope, though, is that as wisdom seekers, that we will first look at these situations from a wise standpoint, and that we will first choice to be an example of wise behaviors to others, so that it encourages them to do the same thing. And as we do, hopefully the byproduct is that people's behaviors will improve. And that, well, in fact, I suppose that someone could see a wise insight and choose to ignore it. That is a possibility. But I believe that most reasonable individuals, when they began to see things from a wise perspective, understand the implication of our choices, including the impact on us. We seem to think that our choices are only going to impact others. And the reality is, when we make unwise choices, we also suffer the consequences for it one way or another. It may not be always direct or evident, but it does happen. It is an impact. And so, again, and my hope is that we will begin to become more of a culture of wisdom seekers, that we are looking to live wisely and not from an unwise standpoint, which means short translation or interpretation is an unwise mindset causes us to behave in a selfish fashion quite often. And it includes and is part of the reason that this pervasive mindset of entitlement, again, to make sure everyone understands, we're looking at this third definition of entitlement as being the belief that one is inherently deserving of privileges or special treatment. And as we as a culture continue to live unwisely, then the result is going to be more and more people having a sense of entitlement as defined here in this definition from the dictionary. And again, not trying to trample or deny what is rights and privileges that we as a culture agree upon in terms of legal protection of rights. That is not what I'm talking about, because we have those legal rights, if you will, and we're entitled to those. But as Jeremy pointed out, they are very limited, or should be very limited, in what those look like. The rest of the way, it becomes a choice of entitlement versus not. And when I choose not to feel and operate in a sense of entitlement, then I, by very nature, consider the impact on others. And I know for me, I, in fact, drive my family a little crazy sometimes, because I am very particular about these behaviors to a point that I don't know, some might even say that I'm a little obsessive about, but it is these things that as we behave in a wise fashion and set the example that could have a big impact on the world around us. I'll give you a couple of examples. Excuse me. Parking. If there's only one parking space left for me to park in, yet there are vehicles in the parking spaces on either side that are parked poorly, I refuse to follow their example of parking poorly. And even if it makes it harder on me to do the right thing, I will still do it, or I will choose to be inconvenienced and find a different location to park or whatever. And that's an example of making that choice not to feel entitled to park however I want, and consider the impact on others. And so, again, thinking of examples and how we can demonstrate the wise behavior is about littering. And I think it's very sad to watch as people out of an entitled mindset will litter in public places. We see the impacts in public parks and things like that. And by the way, part of this problem is people not because they have a sense of being privileged or special treatment, not finding it of importance to not throw their trash on the ground or throw it out in the water or what have you. In other words, if you're in a boat somewhere, rather than throwing it out in the water, keep it in your boat. Yes, you may not. You may have to put up with some issues by doing so because you didn't come prepared or whatever. But that is the wise way to go. When each of us chooses to behave wisely, consider the impact on others, then it makes a great deal of improvement in what is going on in the world around us. So be careful of this sense of entitlement. Be careful not to get carried away with blurring the lines of what we are legally, morally entitled to, primarily freedom to live and to be able to do things that aren't going to impact others. But even then, the wise thing says, even if I can legally do it, should I do this in this situation? And make a choice rather than saying, well, I don't have to be troubled with going to that much thought. I don't have to be inconvenienced by having to make a different choice. And this is where we begin to see the impacts in a big way. So as we choose to behave wisely, we can impact the world around us in a positive fashion, including the more we model wise behavior, the example we're setting is beneficial. And it's also part of learning how to impact or influence others in a way that is in a positive fashion. Welcome, Z. Glad to have you. Let's see. Z make comment, glad you are not living in a communal living apartment place. Okay. it maybe can give a little more explanation on that, Z. But I know that again, the entitlement mindset becomes very evident in those environments because we are, by our very choice to live in those environments, the impacts of others from an entitlement or unwise standpoint impacts us more greatly because of the physical environment. And if that's where you're going with it, yes, I understand. And it, again, where we see this show up can be any of a number of places. I'll give you another example for those of us that travel and we stay in hotels, and we see and are impacted by this entitlement mindset, in that noise levels, behaviors, and so on create conflict, create problems for people because of the lack of wise choices on the part of entitled people. Oh yes, Z says one example: my car is full of scratches and dents from other drivers trying to park. Yes, and in fact, we talked about that, Z, and how that is one of the negative impacts of people behaving with an entitled mindset. And that entitled mindset is, I'll park how I want, when I want, regardless of any consequences to anyone else, or how it affects anyone else. That again is unwise choices, because by its very nature, wisdom says, what is the impact of my choice on other people? And you could still approach it in a wise fashion and come to an unwise decision, but it is a lot less likely, because even the selfish person will begin to figure out that they are impacted negatively by these behaviors and this mindset. So we're running up on time. So my big thought is, look up the word entitlement and ask yourself, am I living in accordance with a fact of having a right to something, and those rights, as agreed upon culturally, are some basic human rights that we've all agreed on? Or are we making choices? Are we behaving, living with this entitlement mindset? And that is the belief that as one is inherently deserving of privileges and special treatment. In other words, I don't need to consider the impact on others. I don't need to consider if it's legal or moral, because I am privileged to do whatever I want to do, when I want to do it, the way I want to do it, regardless of impact on others. Which that approach, I'm going to just say it plainly, is unwise. And it is intrinsically unwise. You cannot behave wisely and behave entitled at the same time. It doesn't work. So thank you, everyone, for joining today. I hope that you're walking away with some new insights and thoughts. And I hope that each of you will, if you're not already a wisdom seeker, become a wisdom seeker, because the wiser we get in our behaviors, the better our world becomes for us and everyone else. So thank you. God bless. Have an amazing week. See you back next Monday, 8 o'clock, for Wisdom Seeker Live podcast. Hope that you will join us and engage with us so that we can have a wise impact on our culture. Take care, everyone. Bye.